The morning sun glinted across the water as Alex finished checking his diving equipment on the small research boat. As a marine biologist who had spent the last 15 years exploring coral reefs around the world, he thought he'd seen everything the ocean had to offer. The gentle rocking of the boat and the salty breeze were as familiar to him as the sound of his own heartbeat. Today was supposed to be just another routine survey off the coast of Belize, documenting the health of the coral reef system for an environmental protection report. "Water conditions look perfect today," said Miguel, Alex's research assistant and boat operator. "Currents mild and visibility should be excellent." Alex nodded, securing his oxygen tank. "I'll try to be quick. Just need to get enough footage of the eastern section to complete our data set." The plan was simple. Drop down to about 60 feet, record video of the coral formations, collect a few samples, and be back on the boat within 2 hours. Alex had done this hundreds of times before. As he slipped beneath the surface, the underwater world enveloped him in its peaceful blue embrace. Schools of bright tropical fish darted between colorful coral formations, and a spotted eagle ray glided gracefully in the distance. Alex activated his underwater camera and began documenting the reef's condition, noting with concern the patches of bleached coral that had increased since his last visit 6 months ago. About 40 minutes into the dive, something unusual caught his eye. His depth sonar was picking up a strangely regular formation on the seafloor beyond the reef drop-off. Most natural underwater formations created irregular patterns, but this showed up as perfectly straight lines running parallel to each other. Curiosity piqued. Alex swam toward the anomaly. The water grew darker as he descended deeper, and he switched on his high-powered dive light. At first he saw nothing but sand and scattered rocks. Then as he moved the beam of light slowly across the seafloor, he froze. 2 rusty metal rails emerged from the sand, running in parallel like an abandoned railway track. Barnacles and sea anemones had made homes along the corroded metal, and small crabs scuttled between them. Alex blinked several times, convinced his eyes were playing tricks on him. But no, these were undeniably railroad tracks buried beneath the ocean where no tracks should be. "What in the world?" he muttered through his breathing apparatus, bubbles escaping from his mask. He checked his location on his underwater GPS. They were nearly 2 miles from the nearest shoreline, in water that should never have been dry land in recorded history. Alex followed the tracks for several yards, documenting everything with his camera. The rails appeared to be heading deeper, disappearing into the murky blue distance. He wanted desperately to follow them to their end, but a quick check of his oxygen levels warned him that he'd already stayed down longer than planned. With reluctance, he turned back toward the boat, his mind racing with questions. How did railroad tracks end up at the bottom of the ocean? How old were they? Where did they lead? The mystery of it consumed his thoughts as he slowly ascended, making the required decompression stops. When he finally broke the surface, Miguel was waiting with a concerned expression. "You were down there a long time, boss. Everything okay?" Alex pulled himself onto the boat, removing his mask with shaking hands. "You're not going to believe what I found down there." Back at their small research station on the mainland, Alex downloaded the footage from his camera onto the computer. Miguel leaned over his shoulder, his expression changing from curiosity to disbelief as the images of the submerged railway tracks appeared on screen. "This can't be real," Miguel said, zooming in on one of the clearer images. "How is this possible?" "I have no idea," Alex replied, still processing what he'd seen. "But I'm going to find out." That evening, Alex sent the images to several colleagues around the world. He also reached out to a friend who worked at the National Historical Society, hoping for some context about the region's past. Sleep evaded him that night as his mind kept returning to those rusted rails stretching across the ocean floor, leading to who knew where. By morning, his inbox was flooded with responses. None of his marine biology colleagues had ever encountered anything like this before. A few suggested it might be debris from a shipwreck. But Alex knew what he'd seen. These were properly laid railway tracks, not random pieces of metal. His historian friend, however, provided the first real clue. According to old records, a fruit company had built extensive railway systems along the coast in the early 1900s to transport bananas from plantations to waiting ships. But all known tracks were well documented and accounted for. None extended into what would have been ocean even a century ago. "We need to go back," Alex told Miguel over breakfast. "We need better equipment, more oxygen, and underwater lights. I want to follow those tracks." It took 3 days to gather the necessary permits and equipment. Word had spread among the local research community, and several other scientists offered to join the expedition. But Alex kept the team small, just himself, Miguel, and Lena, an underwater archaeologist who happened to be in the area studying Mayan artifacts found in cenotes. The morning of their dive, the weather was not as cooperative as before. Dark clouds hung low over the water, and the sea churned with the promise of a coming storm. Maybe we should wait for better conditions, Miguel suggested as their boat pitched in the swells. But Alex couldn't bear the thought of delay. The forecast says the storm won't hit until evening. We have time. They anchored above the coordinates where Alex had found the tracks, and the 3 divers entered the water. The visibility was worse than before, the water murky with stirred-up sediment. They descended slowly, staying close together in the gloom. When they reached the seafloor, Alex felt a moment of panic. What if he couldn't find the tracks again? What if he'd somehow imagined the whole thing? But then Lena's light flashed twice, their signal for a discovery, and relief washed over him. There they were, the rusty rails emerging from the sand like ancient serpents. Lena immediately began taking measurements and samples of marine growth on the metal, which would help date how long the tracks had been underwater. Miguel set up powerful lights to illuminate the scene, revealing details Alex had missed on his first dive. The rails were standard gauge, consistent with industrial railways of the early 20th century, and they showed signs of regular use, worn, areas where countless wheels had once rolled over them. Alex pointed in the direction the tracks led him deeper into the ocean and made a gesture, asking if they should follow. Lena gave the okay sign, and the 3 divers began to swim along the submerged railway. The tracks continued in an almost perfectly straight line for several hundred yards, then began to curve gradually. As they followed the bend, they noticed the ocean floor sloping downward. The water grew colder and darker despite their lights. Small fish darted away from the unexpected intrusion into their dark world. After 20 minutes of steady swimming, they came upon something that made them stop in unison. The tracks disappeared into what looked like a collapsed tunnel entrance, half buried in sand and rock. Above what remained of the entrance, barely visible beneath a crust of coral and sea growth, was what appeared to be a concrete archway. Lena swam closer, scraping away some of the growth with her knife. Underneath, faintly visible, were carved symbols or letters. She took several close-up photos before signaling that they should check their oxygen levels. All 3 were running lower than comfortable for this depth. With obvious reluctance, they turned back, marking the tunnel entrance on their GPS. As they began their ascent, Alex couldn't help looking back at the dark opening they'd discovered. Whatever lay beyond that submerged tunnel entrance, whatever those tracks had been built to reach, remained hidden in darkness, waiting to be discovered, and he was determined to be the one to uncover its secrets. Back on the surface, as they headed for shore with the storm clouds gathering ominously behind them, Alex felt a mixture of excitement and frustration. They had found something significant, something that shouldn't exist, but the true discovery still lay ahead, at the end of those mysterious underwater rails. "What do you think is down there?" Miguel asked as they unloaded their gear at the dock, rain beginning to patter around them. Alex shook his head, staring out at the darkening horizon. "I don't know. But whatever it is, it was important enough for someone to build a railway that now sits at the bottom of the ocean. And I'm going to find out what's at the end of those tracks, no matter what." Little did he know that what awaited him would be beyond anything he could imagine. A discovery that would soon capture the attention of the entire world. The storm raged through the night, lashing the small coastal research station with wind and rain. Alex barely slept, his mind filled with images of the submerged railway tracks and the mysterious tunnel entrance. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind a washed-out sky and rough seas that would make diving impossible for at least a day. "Maybe it's for the best," Lena said as they gathered in the station's small kitchen. The underwater archaeologist was reviewing the photos from yesterday's dive on her laptop. "We need time to figure out what we're dealing with before we go back down there." Alex nodded reluctantly, pouring himself another cup of coffee. "Any luck with those markings you found on the archway?" Lena turned her laptop around, showing an enhanced image of the carvings she'd uncovered beneath the sea growth. "It's definitely a date 1923 and some kind of company logo, though it's partially eroded. I've seen something similar before, I just can't place it. Miguel, who had been quiet all morning, suddenly spoke up. My grandfather used to tell stories about the big fruit companies that ran everything around here back in the day. Said they were like their own governments, building railways, towns, ports, whatever they needed. The United Fruit Company, Lena said, snapping her fingers. That's what this reminds me of. They had massive operations all through Central America in the early 20th century. Alex leaned over to look at the image more closely. But why would they build a railway that runs into the ocean? It doesn't make any sense. Maybe it didn't always run into the ocean, Miguel suggested. The coastline changes. Land erodes. Not 2 miles out to sea it doesn't, Alex countered. Not in less than 100 years. The three fell silent, contemplating the puzzle before them. Finally, Lena closed her laptop. We need more information. Historical records, old maps, company archives, anything that might tell us what was happening here in the 1920s. They divided up the research tasks. Miguel would talk to local elders who might have family stories about the region's past. Lena would contact museums and historical societies. Alex would look into geological surveys and coastal changes. By mid-afternoon, they had taken over the station's common room, pinning maps and printouts to a large corkboard. Miguel returned from the nearby village with an old man named Don Pedro, whose father had worked for the company, as he called it. My father laid tracks for them for 20 years, Don Pedro said, his weathered hands tracing the coastline on an old map. But he never spoke of tracks going out to sea. That would be madness, no? What about secret projects? Alex asked. Anything unusual happening around 1923? Don Pedro shook his head slowly, then paused. There were stories, whispers among the workers. My father would not speak of them even years later, just that there was a special project and men who worked on it either became rich or disappeared. This cryptic information only deepened the mystery. Meanwhile, Lena had discovered something in the archives of a maritime museum in Boston. Listen to this, she said, reading from her notebook. In 1922, the United Fruit Company received a special government contract for strategic resource development in British Honduras, what's now Belize. The project was classified, with details sealed until 1973. But when the files were supposed to be opened, they were reported missing. Convenient, Alex remarked. It gets better, Lena continued. There are shipping records showing unusual cargo deliveries to this area between 1922 and 1924. Heavy machinery, massive amounts of concrete, steel beams, much more than needed for standard fruit processing facilities or railways. Alex's research had yielded another piece of the puzzle. According to geological surveys, there used to be a small island about 2 miles offshore from where we found the tracks. It doesn't appear on maps after 1926. An island just vanished? Miguel asked skeptically. The survey notes suggest it was reclaimed by the sea due to natural causes, but the timing seems suspicious, doesn't it? Right after this big secret construction project. As evening fell, the three researchers stood before their board of collected information, trying to make sense of the fragments. The picture emerging was both fascinating and disturbing. A secretive corporate project, government involvement, an island that disappeared, and railway tracks now lying at the bottom of the ocean. We need to go back down there, Alex said firmly. But we need better equipment. That tunnel could be unstable after all these years underwater. I know someone who might help, Lena offered, an old colleague who specializes in underwater cave systems. He has equipment designed for confined space exploration. And we'll need more historical context, Miguel added. I'll keep talking to the old-timers in the village. Someone must know something. The next day passed in a flurry of preparations. Lena's colleague, Dr. Chen, arrived with specialized equipment, powerful underwater lights, sonar mapping devices, and breathing apparatus designed for extended dives in enclosed spaces. This tunnel of yours intrigues me, Dr. Chen said, as he helped them load the equipment onto their boat. Man-made structures underwater often create unique ecosystems. I'm curious to see what might be living down there after all this time. While the others prepared the diving gear, Alex made one last check of his email. A response from a historian at the National Archives had arrived overnight, with an attachment that made his heart race. Everyone, look at this, he called out, hurrying to show them his laptop screen. It was a black and white photograph from 1923, showing a group of men in suits standing beside railway tracks that led directly into a large tunnel carved into a small rocky island. "That's it," Lena breathed. "That's our tunnel." The resemblance was unmistakable, the same archway design, the same curve of the tracks. But in the photograph, the tunnel entrance was well above sea level, cut into solid rock. How does an entire island sink beneath the waves in less than a century? Miguel wondered aloud. It doesn't, Dr. Chen said grimly. Not naturally, anyway. The implication hung heavy in the air. Whatever had happened to the island and the tunnel had been deliberate. Someone had wanted it hidden beneath the ocean. With the seas calmer than the previous day, they set out early the following morning. The anticipation was palpable as they anchored above the coordinates and prepared to dive. This time, they carried more oxygen, better lights, and mapping equipment. "We stay together at all times," Alex instructed as they prepared to enter the water. "If anyone's air gets below a quarter tank, we all turn back." No exceptions. The descent seemed to take forever. When they finally reached the seafloor, the railway tracks emerged from the sand just as before, stretching away into the gloom. Following them to the tunnel entrance took less time now that they knew the way. The collapsed tunnel mouth loomed before them, dark and forbidding despite their powerful lights. Years of ocean currents had scoured away more of the covering Alex had seen on his first visit, revealing the full extent of the concrete archway with its faded date and company logo. Dr. Chen moved forward with a sonar mapping device, scanning the tunnel entrance and the surrounding area. The others waited, watching schools of fish dart in and out of the darkness beyond the archway. After several minutes, Dr. Chen turned and made a series of hand signals. The tunnel appeared stable enough to enter, but they should proceed with extreme caution. Heart pounding, Alex led the way, his powerful light cutting through the darkness. The tunnel was larger than he'd expected, easily wide enough for 2 train cars to pass side by side. The railway tracks continued inside, disappearing into the murky distance. As they swam deeper into the tunnel, Alex noticed something odd. The walls were not rough-hewn rock as he'd expected, but smooth concrete reinforced with steel beams that had largely resisted the corrosive effects of seawater. This was no hastily built mining operation. It was a massive engineering project constructed to last. About 50 yards in, the tunnel began to slope downward at a gentle angle. The temperature dropped noticeably and the water became clearer, with less suspended sediment. Their lights revealed side chambers branching off from the main passage, some with heavy metal doors hanging from rusted hinges. Lena signaled that she wanted to examine one of these rooms. Carefully, the group approached the nearest open doorway. Inside, their lights revealed what appeared to be an office space, the remains of a desk, a filing cabinet tipped on its side, and shelves lining the walls. Everything was covered in a thick layer of silt and marine growth. As Lena moved closer to examine the desk, her fin disturbed the silt, revealing something beneath. The skeletal remains of a human hand, a rusted key still clutched between the bony fingers. The group froze, exchanging shocked glances through their masks. They had found more than just an abandoned tunnel. They had found a tomb. Dr. Chen signaled that they should continue down the main tunnel. With growing unease, they swam onward, passing more side rooms, some open, others sealed behind heavy doors. The tracks continued downward, leading them deeper beneath the seabed. After what seemed like an eternity but was probably only 20 minutes, they reached a massive set of double doors blocking the entire tunnel. Unlike the other doors they'd passed, these appeared to be made of solid steel with no visible signs of corrosion. In the center was a large wheel mechanism, like those used on submarine hatches. Dr. Chen examined the doors carefully, then turned to the group with a series of urgent hand signals. Their oxygen was running low. They needed to return to the surface. With great reluctance, Alex nodded. They had found something extraordinary, but they had also reached the limits of their current dive. Whatever lay beyond those steel doors would have to wait. As they began their return journey through the tunnel, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Once, when he glanced back, he thought he saw a flicker of movement in the darkness beyond their light beams. But when he paused and directed his light toward it, there was nothing there, just the endless tunnel stretching back toward the mysterious doors. What secrets lay beyond that sealed entrance? What had the United Fruit Company been hiding on their vanished island? And whose remains had they found in that underwater office? The questions multiplied with each discovery, drawing them deeper into a mystery that had lain hidden beneath the waves for almost a century. As they began their ascent to the surface, Alex knew one thing with absolute certainty: they would be going back down. The world needed to know what was hidden at the end of those rusty rails beneath the ocean. Back on the boat, the four divers sat in stunned silence as they removed their gear. The discovery of human remains in the underwater tunnel had cast a shadow over their excitement. What had been a fascinating historical mystery now felt darker, tinged with tragedy. "We need to report this to the authorities," Lena said finally, running a hand through her wet hair. "Those remains are evidence of something, possibly something criminal." "And say what exactly?" Alex countered. "That we found a skeleton in a secret underwater tunnel that shouldn't exist? They'll think we're crazy." Dr. Chen, methodically checking his equipment, looked up. "Not if we bring them proof. I recorded everything with my underwater camera. The tunnel, the office, the remains." Miguel, who had been unusually quiet since they surfaced, spoke up. "My cousin works for the coastal police. He might know how to handle this without causing a huge fuss or getting us in trouble for diving in a restricted area." They agreed to speak with Miguel's cousin before making any official reports. As they headed back to shore, Dr. Chen connected his camera to his tablet, allowing them to review the footage from their dive. "Look at this," he said, pausing on a frame showing the steel doors they'd found at the end of the tunnel. "See these markings around the wheel mechanism? They're pressure indicators. This door was designed to hold back something under significant pressure." "Water?" Alex suggested. "Or to keep water out," Lena said thoughtfully. "What if the tunnel continues beyond those doors but in a dry environment?" The possibility was mind-boggling. An air pocket maintained for nearly a century beneath the ocean floor. It seemed impossible, yet the sophisticated engineering they'd witnessed suggested that whoever built the tunnel had resources and technology beyond what was typical for the 1920s. Miguel's cousin, Officer Rivera, met them at the research station that evening. He viewed their footage with growing concern. "This is way above my pay grade," he admitted, "but I know someone at the National Historical Preservation Office who should see this. And yes, you should have reported the human remains immediately, but given the unusual circumstances..." He shook his head. "Let me make some calls." Within hours, their discovery had set off a chain reaction. By morning, government officials had arrived along with a team from the university and representatives from an international maritime archaeology foundation. Their small research station became the center of an impromptu command post. "They're taking over," Alex muttered as he watched uniformed officials setting up equipment on their dock. "We're going to lose control of the whole discovery." "Did we ever really have control?" Lena asked pragmatically. "This is bigger than us now. At least they're bringing resources we could never access on our own." She was right. By midday, a specialized research vessel had anchored offshore, equipped with advanced diving equipment, underwater drones, and a decompression chamber. The team was introduced to Dr. Alvarez, the government's lead scientist for the investigation. "Your discovery is remarkable," Dr. Alvarez told them, genuine admiration in her voice. "We'd like you all to remain involved as consultants, given your first-hand knowledge of the site." It was a diplomatic way of saying they would no longer be leading the exploration, but at least they wouldn't be shut out entirely. Over the next 2 days, underwater drones mapped the entire tunnel system, while experts analyzed the footage and samples the team had collected. The historians had made progress as well, uncovering documents that shed light on the mysterious project. It seems the United Fruit Company partnered with the U.S. government on a classified initiative called Project Deepwater in 1922, a historian explained during one briefing. The official documentation describes it as submarine docking infrastructure research, but there are discrepancies in the financial records that suggest something much more extensive. "Submarine docking," Miguel repeated. "In 1922? That technology was still primitive then." "Exactly," the historian nodded, "which makes us wonder what they were really building." The analysis of the human remains found in the underwater office added another layer to the mystery. Preliminary examination suggested they belonged to a male in his 30s who had died violently. The skull showed evidence of a severe impact. By the third day, preparations were complete for a major dive operation to open the steel doors at the end of the tunnel. Despite the influx of experts, Alex, Lena, Miguel, and Dr. Chen were included in the dive team due to their familiarity with the site. "We'll bring cutting equipment in case the wheel mechanism is seized," the dive coordinator explained during the briefing. "And we'll deploy relay stations for communications all the way through the tunnel. No one goes beyond those doors until we've established that it's safe." As their boat headed out to the dive site, Alex felt a mixture of anticipation and unease. The clear blue sky and calm seas were a stark contrast to the turbulent emotions within him. He'd started this journey with a simple, unexpected discovery. Now he was part of something that might rewrite history. The descent to the tunnel seemed routine now, almost familiar. But Alex noticed new details. Marine biologists had tagged various fish species that had made homes in the tunnel's nooks and crannies, and engineers had installed guide ropes and emergency air supply stations along the way. When they reached the steel doors, a team of technical divers moved forward with equipment to test the surrounding water and structure. After several tense minutes, they signaled that it was safe to proceed with opening the doors. Two divers approached the wheel mechanism, applying a penetrating oil to the corroded metal before attempting to turn it. To everyone's surprise, after some initial resistance, the wheel began to move smoothly, suggesting that the mechanism had been designed with long-term submersion in mind. As the wheel turned, a series of loud clanks reverberated through the water, felt more than heard by the dive team. Slowly, with a grace that seemed impossible for such massive structures, the steel doors began to swing inward. The dive coordinator signaled for the team to wait as underwater drones were sent through the opening first. The assembled divers watched their tablet screens as the drone's lights illuminated what lay beyond. The footage revealed a massive chamber, easily the size of an aircraft hangar, with the railway tracks continuing across its floor. Unlike the tunnel, which had been fully submerged, this chamber contained a large air pocket in its upper portion. The water level rose only partway up the walls, creating an underground cavern with its own artificial atmosphere. After ensuring there were no immediate dangers, the dive team was given permission to enter the chamber. They were instructed to remain underwater for now, exploring only the submerged portion of the space. Swimming through the doorway, Alex felt like he was entering another world. The chamber was clearly man-made, with concrete walls reinforced by steel beams. Large floodlights had been mounted on the walls, long dead now. The railway tracks led to a loading platform that rose above the water level. As they explored the submerged section of the chamber, they discovered machinery covered in a thick layer of silt, pumps, generators, and equipment that might have once maintained the air quality in the chamber. Everything showed signs of abandonment rather than catastrophic failure, suggesting the facility had been deliberately closed down. Near the center of the chamber, partially submerged, sat three large cylindrical structures, each about the size of a subway car. Their sleek, metallic surfaces had resisted corrosion better than anything else they'd seen. No windows were visible, just sealed hatches on their sides and what looked like propellers at one end. "Submarines," Dr. Chen signaled with his hands, his eyes wide behind his mask. But they didn't look like any submarines from the 1920s. Their design was sleeker, more advanced, almost futuristic for that era. The dive coordinator signaled that it was time to inspect the above-water portion of the chamber. Carefully, the team surfaced into the air pocket. The air was stale but breathable, according to their equipment. They kept their masks on as a precaution. Powerful lights revealed catwalks running along the walls and what appeared to be a control room overlooking the chamber. Climbing out of the water onto the loading platform, the team moved with careful steps, aware that the structure had been submerged for decades before the water level stabilized. Alex approached one of the cylindrical vessels, wiping away a layer of grime from its surface to reveal a symbol, not the United Fruit Company logo they'd seen elsewhere, but something he didn't recognize, a triangle with a lightning bolt through it. Lena was examining documents that had been protected inside sealed containers on a nearby workstation. Her hands trembled as she carefully opened one folder. "Alex," she called, her voice muffled through her mask. "You need to see this." He joined her, peering at the faded blueprint she'd unfolded. It showed the cylindrical vessels in detail, labeled in German rather than English. But it was the date stamped in the corner that sent a chill down his spine. 1943. 20 years after the tunnel was supposedly built, and in the middle of World War II. "This doesn't make sense," he whispered. "How could..." A sudden tremor shook the chamber, sending dust and small debris raining down from the ceiling. The water around the platform began to churn, bubbling as if boiling. Back in the water, the dive coordinator shouted, "We need to leave now!" As they scrambled back into their dive gear, Alex noticed something that stopped him cold. One of the cylindrical vessels was humming, faint lights blinking along its hull where all had been dark before. After nearly a century underwater, something was waking up. And they had no idea what would happen next. Chaos erupted as the team scrambled back into the water. The humming from the cylindrical vessel grew louder, vibrating through the chamber as small lights continued to blink along its hull. The water around it began to glow an eerie blue-green. "Move! Everyone out now!" The dive coordinator shouted through the communication system. Alex hesitated, his eyes fixed on the awakening machine. Something about it held him transfixed. Technology that shouldn't exist coming to life after decades of silence beneath the ocean. Lena grabbed his arm, yanking him back to reality. "Alex, we need to go!" They plunged into the water as another tremor shook the chamber, stronger than before. Swimming back toward the steel doors, Alex risked a glance over his shoulder. Through the churning water, he saw a hatch on the glowing vessel slowly beginning to open. The dive team pushed through the doorway just as emergency protocols kicked in. The massive steel doors, designed nearly a century ago, began to automatically swing shut behind them. The last thing Alex saw before the doors sealed was a dark silhouette emerging from the open hatch of the vessel. The return journey through the tunnel was a blur of panic and adrenaline. When they finally surfaced beside the research vessel, military personnel were already boarding from inflatable boats. "The entire area is being quarantined," Dr. Alvarez informed them as they were helped aboard. "We're picking up unusual energy readings from the site." In the ship's conference room, still dripping from their hasty exit, the team struggled to process what they'd witnessed. Military officers and scientists fired questions at them while technicians analyzed the data from their equipment. "You're saying the submarine, or whatever it is, just turned on by itself?" one official asked incredulously. "It wasn't random," Alex insisted. "It happened right after we found those blueprints. Almost like it was responding to our discovery." Dr. Chen, usually the most composed of the group, looked shaken. The design of those vessels, they were decades ahead of their time. Even by today's standards, some of that technology looked advanced. The government officials exchanged glances. One of them, a stern-faced woman who hadn't introduced herself, nodded to an aide who brought in a sealed file. "What we're about to share is classified," she said, opening the file. In 1944, Allied intelligence intercepted fragments of communication about something called Project Deep Sea. It was believed to be a last-ditch Nazi initiative involving experimental submarine technology. She placed several photos on the table, grainy black and white images, showing designs remarkably similar to the vessels they had just seen. "We always assumed it was never completed," she continued, "that the technology was theoretical, beyond what was possible at the time. But what you've described, how does this connect to a United Fruit Company tunnel built in 1923? Lena asked, the historian in her refusing to ignore the timeline discrepancy. The official's expression darkened. "That's what concerns us most. Either the dating on the tunnel is wrong or someone was developing advanced technology in Central America 2 decades before World War II even began," Alex finished. The implications were staggering. The history they all knew, the accepted timeline of technological development, perhaps even the narrative of the war itself, might be built on incomplete information. As night fell, the seas around the dive site began to exhibit strange phenomena. The water glowed with the same blue-green luminescence they had seen around the vessel. Instrument readings showed fluctuating magnetic fields and energy signatures that the scientists couldn't explain. "Whatever's happening down there is intensifying," Dr. Alvarez reported after reviewing the sensor data. "And it's not contained to the chamber anymore. It's affecting the entire tunnel system." Military vessels had established a perimeter, keeping curious fishing boats and civilian craft away from the increasingly turbulent waters. Satellite imagery showed the glow was visible from space, drawing international attention that could no longer be contained. Around midnight, Alex found Lena on the deck, staring out at the glowing waters. I can't stop thinking about those blueprints, she said without turning. They were in German, yes, but there was something else. A symbol in the corner beneath the Nazi markings. A corporate logo. Alex leaned against the railing beside her. United Fruit Company? She shook her head. No, it was for Standard Oil, one of the biggest American companies of the era. The revelation hit Alex like a physical blow. You're saying American companies were collaborating with... I don't know what I'm saying, Lena cut him off. It doesn't make sense. None of this does, unless... Before she could finish, a tremendous boom echoed across the water. The ocean in the distance seemed to rise up in a massive dome before collapsing back with a thunderous roar. Alarms blared throughout the ship as crew members rushed to their stations. All personnel to emergency positions, a voice commanded over the loudspeakers. Unidentified object approaching from the dive site. Alex and Lena raced to the bridge, where monitors showed a fast-moving object rising from the depths about half a mile from their position. As it broke the surface, they could see it was one of the cylindrical vessels from the chamber, cutting through the waves with incredible speed, trailing blue-green light in its wake. Military ships moved to intercept, but the vessel dove beneath the surface before they could reach it, vanishing from conventional radar. Only the specialized equipment brought for the expedition could still track its faint energy signature, moving rapidly out to sea. What about the other vessels? Alex asked urgently. Are they active too? Underwater drones show no movement from the second vessel, a technician reported. But the third, he hesitated. The third one is gone. There's just an empty space where it was docked. As the night wore on, the situation grew increasingly complex. Government officials arrived by helicopter, transforming the research vessel into an impromptu command center. International calls were made, treaties invoked, and experts in historical military technology consulted. By dawn, they had pieced together a disturbing hypothesis. The underwater facility had been a joint project between American industrial interests and German scientists, predating the rise of the Nazi Party. When war broke out, the collaboration had officially ended, but evidence suggested that the work continued in secret, with technology and information flowing between seemingly opposed sides of the conflict. It was never about fruit, Dr. Alvarez explained. Reviewing the newly decrypted historical documents, the United Fruit Company was just a cover. The railway, the tunnel, it was all built to support this hidden facility away from prying eyes. But what were they building? Miguel asked the question on everyone's mind. Those weren't ordinary submarines. Before anyone could respond, the communications officer interrupted. Sir, we're receiving a transmission. It's coming from the missing vessel. The room fell silent as the officer put the transmission on speaker. At first there was only static. Then a voice, speaking English with a heavy German accent. After 79 years, 6 months, and 18 days, Project Tiefsee has been reactivated. The waiting is over. The awakening begins. The transmission cut off, leaving the room in stunned silence. Before anyone could react, reports began flooding in from around the globe. Unusual energy signatures, identical to those from the underwater site, were being detected at locations worldwide, in remote Arctic regions, deep in the Amazon rainforest beneath the Sahara Desert, and in the mountains of Tibet. They're all activating, the stern-faced official whispered. But what are they? Alex had been studying the original blueprints they'd recovered, trying to make sense of the strange annotations and calculations in the margins. Something clicked in his mind, a connection between the vessel designs, the locations now showing activity, and the cryptic references to the awakening. These aren't weapons, he said slowly, the realization dawning on him. And they're not just submarines. According to these notes, they're called Schlüsselöffner, key openers. Key openers? For what? Lena asked. Before Alex could answer, the entire ship shuddered. The water around them began to churn and glow brighter than before. Directly beneath them, at the original dive site, something massive was happening. The underwater drone's footage showed the remaining vessel in the chamber pulsing with energy. The railway tracks they had followed to this point were now glowing too, not with reflected light, but with their own internal energy, as if they had transformed from rusty metal into something else entirely. Sir, a technician called out, voice shaking, the tunnel isn't just a tunnel. According to these readings, it extends much deeper than we thought, at least 20 miles beneath the ocean floor. And whatever's down there, it's waking up. As the sun rose over the horizon, illuminating the churning, glowing waters, Alex knew that what they had found wasn't just an abandoned military project or a historical curiosity. The rusty rails they had followed beneath, the ocean had led them to something that would fundamentally change humanity's understanding of its own history, and perhaps its future. Whatever waited at the true end of those tracks, the world was about to discover it, and nothing would ever be the same again. The research vessel rocked violently as the waters churned beneath it. Military ships in the perimeter began moving away from the epicenter of the disturbance, their captains unwilling to risk their vessels as the sea itself seemed to boil with blue-green energy. "We need to evacuate," the stern-faced official ordered, shouting to be heard over the alarms. "All personnel to the helicopters immediately." But Alex couldn't tear himself away from the monitor showing the drone footage. The remaining cylindrical vessel in the underwater chamber was now completely engulfed in pulsating light, hovering above its docking station. The railway tracks leading into the deeper tunnel were transforming before their eyes, the rusty metal becoming something crystalline and translucent, glowing with the same unearthly energy. "Alex, we have to go." Lena tugged at his arm. "Look," he said, pointing at the screen. "The tracks aren't ending at the chamber. They're continuing downward through that passage there. It's opening up." On the screen, a previously solid wall at the back of the chamber was receding, revealing a vast vertical shaft that plunged deep into the earth. The glowing tracks curved elegantly down its wall, spiraling into the darkness below. "I'm not leaving," Alex said firmly. "Not when we're about to discover what's really down there." Dr. Chen stepped forward. "I'm staying too. These readings are unlike anything science has ever recorded. Whatever is happening might never happen again." Dr. Alvarez looked torn between professional duty and scientific curiosity. Finally, she turned to the military official. "We need a small team to continue observations. The rest can evacuate, but I volunteer to stay." After heated arguments, a compromise was reached. Most personnel would evacuate to a safe distance, but a small team, including Alex, Lena, Dr. Chen, Dr. Alvarez, and a few essential crew members, would remain aboard with enough helicopter capacity to evacuate if the situation worsened. As the larger helicopters departed, carrying away the majority of the team, an eerie calm settled over the ship. The churning waters had stilled, though they continued to glow with intense blue-green light. Below, the underwater drones showed the hovering vessel beginning to move, descending slowly into the newly revealed vertical shaft, following the spiraling tracks. "We need to follow it," Alex said, turning to Dr. Alvarez. "The drones can only transmit from a certain distance. We'll lose the signal if it goes too deep." "Are you suggesting we dive back down there?" Miguel asked incredulously. "After what we just saw?" "Not us," Dr. Chen interjected. "We have unmanned submersibles aboard, research vessels designed for deep-sea exploration. They can handle extreme pressure and transmit data through solid rock using low-frequency waves." The decision was made quickly. Within an hour, they had deployed 2 unmanned submersibles, directing them through the tunnel and into the chamber. The vehicles were equipped with advanced sensors, high-definition cameras, and sample collection tools. On the ship's main screen, they watched the feed as the submersibles entered the vertical shaft. The spiraling tracks glowed brighter as they descended, illuminating the passage. What they had initially thought was solid rock turned out to be something else entirely, a material that shifted between states, sometimes appearing solid, other times translucent like crystal or flowing like liquid metal. "This isn't natural," Dr. Alvarez whispered. "And it's not something we could have engineered, even today." The descent continued for what seemed like hours, though the depth gauge showed they had only traveled about 5 miles beneath the ocean floor. The cylindrical vessel they were following maintained a constant distance ahead, moving with purpose along the tracks. Suddenly, the passage widened dramatically. The submersible's lights could no longer reach the walls, giving the impression that they had entered an immense void deep within the earth. "Are we still receiving positioning data?" Dr. Alvarez asked one of the technicians. "Yes, but it doesn't make sense," he replied, checking the readings. "According to this, we're directly beneath the Bermuda Triangle." The words hung in the air, adding another layer to the already mind-bending mystery. The Bermuda Triangle, a place associated with unexplained disappearances of ships and aircraft for centuries. As the submersibles continued forward, their lights revealed something in the distance, a massive structure suspended in the void. At first it appeared to be a city, with spires and towers stretching in all directions. But as they drew closer, they realized it was a single, enormous construct, a perfect geometric shape that seemed to fold in on itself in ways that defied conventional physics. "That's impossible," one of the scientists breathed. "That structure violates every principle of three-dimensional space." The cylindrical vessel they had been following accelerated toward the structure, disappearing into a pulsing aperture at its center. The submersibles approached more cautiously, their cameras capturing images that would soon be seen by billions of people around the world. As they neared the structure, intricate patterns became visible on its surface, not decorations, but what appeared to be mathematical equations and diagrams of astonishing complexity. And interspersed among these were undeniably familiar symbols: ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs, Sumerian cuneiform Mayan calendar notations, Chinese oracle bone script, the written languages of humanity's oldest civilizations. "It's some kind of archive," Lena whispered, her historian's mind racing to process what she was seeing. "Or a library." One of the submersibles extended a probe to take readings directly from the structure's surface. The moment contact was made, the equations began to glow and shift, rearranging themselves before their eyes. A section of the surface receded, creating an opening just large enough for the submersibles to enter. Inside was a vast chamber filled with countless objects suspended in mid-air, artifacts from every period of human history, arranged in perfect chronological order. Ancient tools and weapons gave way to manuscripts and books, then to more modern devices, all leading toward a central platform where something pulsed with blinding light. The cylindrical vessel they had followed hovered near this platform. As they watched, it opened fully, revealing not a craft but a container. Inside was what appeared to be a control console, designed for human operation. "It's a key," Alex realized aloud. Just like the blueprint said, a key opener. But not for a door. For this. Before they could process this revelation, the submersible's sensors detected movement throughout the structure. Panels were opening along the walls, revealing thousands, perhaps millions, of the same cylindrical vessels they had found in the underwater chamber, each in its own niche, waiting. And then, the central platform activated. A holographic display of stunning clarity appeared above it, showing Earth from space. The image zoomed in on specific locations, the same places where energy signatures had been detected earlier. At each site, similar structures were being revealed. Beneath the Antarctic ice, inside a mountain in Tibet under the Sahara Desert, in the depths of the Amazon. Text appeared beside the image, the same indecipherable equations they had seen outside, but they began to transform, shifting into modern languages: English, Russian, Chinese, Arabic, Hindi, every major language on Earth. The message was the same in each: the Guardians return. "The test is complete. Humanity has reached the necessary threshold. Access to the archive is granted." The feed from the submersibles was being broadcast globally now, picked up by news networks worldwide, in homes, offices, and public squares across the planet. People stood in stunned silence, watching as humanity's understanding of its own history and place in the universe was fundamentally rewritten in real time. The truth revealed by the rusty rails beneath the ocean was staggering. The structure was not built by Nazis or Americans or any modern human civilization. It predated them all, constructed by what the archive referred to as the Guardians, visitors who had arrived on Earth hundreds of thousands of years ago. They had not come to conquer or exploit, but to observe and occasionally guide. The archive contained the complete record of their interactions with early humans, technological boosts given at crucial moments in history, from the control of fire to the principles of agriculture, writing, mathematics, and beyond. The World War II-era project that had built the underwater tunnel had been the result of a few humans discovering one of the keys and following its guidance, not fully understanding what they were participating in. The archive had allowed this limited access because humanity was approaching a crucial developmental stage. Now, according to the message being transmitted around the world, that stage had been reached. The full knowledge of the archive, sciences beyond current human understanding, histories of civilizations lost to time, and the true story of Earth's place in the cosmos was being offered freely to all of humanity. As the implications sank in, people everywhere experienced the same mixture of awe, fear, hope, and wonder. Religious leaders sought meaning in their texts. Scientists scrambled to understand the principles behind the technology, and governments held emergency sessions to determine how to respond to this shared inheritance. Back on the research vessel, Alex stood at the railing looking out at the now calm sea. The water no longer glowed, having returned to its natural blue state. But the world itself had changed irrevocably. Nothing would ever be the same. Lena joined him, her face reflecting the same dazed amazement everyone felt. "When you first found those rusty rails under the water," she said quietly, "did you ever imagine they would lead to this?" Alex shook his head, watching as news helicopters circled overhead, broadcasting to a transformed world. "I thought I'd found a forgotten piece of history," he said. "Instead, we found the true beginning of our story." Beneath the waves, the underwater tunnel remained. The rusty rails now returned to their original state, an unassuming entrance to the greatest discovery in human history, hidden in plain sight for centuries, waiting for someone curious enough to follow where they led.